Right now, I'm going to take you through a highly detailed, step-by-step cinematic breakdown of what is undeniably shaping up to be the darkest conclusion to a television series ever constructed. We are going to dive incredibly deep into the psychology, the visceral symbolism, and the brutal reality of how this entire universe finally collapses in on itself. There's really no time to waste with pleasantries or long introductions here. Let's just immediately jump right into the uncompromising structure of this final chapter. I genuinely want you to mentally prepare yourself as we slowly unpack this narrative step by step. Because look, if you came into this expecting a glorious sunrise, some triumphant hero speech, or a really neat bow tying up all the loose ends, you are fundamentally in the wrong place. What we're analyzing here is a classical tragedy in its purest form. It's a story built entirely on inevitable, catastrophic consequences stemming from years of unchecked power and absolute moral decay. We're going to walk through this descent starting from the very first minute, and I need to explain exactly how this nightmare begins. The narrative immediately establishes its terrifying stakes by shockingly killing off the Deep right at the very start of the episode. And I mean instantly. There's no grand, swelling music to accompany his fall. There's no dramatic final monologue. There's absolutely zero heroic sacrifice to magically redeem his past misdeeds. He is just gone. And honestly, as cold and abrupt as that sounds, it makes perfect sense from a cinematic and structural standpoint. Let's really dig into why the writers chose to execute this specific beat right out of the gate. I absolutely love how this perfectly sets a ruthless, uncompromising tone for everything that follows. Think about his character arc for a second. The Deep has survived 5 entire seasons purely as the universe's ultimate punching bag, right? He's been humiliated, exposed, excommunicated, and yet he always somehow survives while much stronger, better characters fall. His sudden, unceremonious demise right at the start, likely involving Starlight as sheer collateral damage in a chaotic, blinding moment, is a visceral, unignorable warning to us. It strips away all the plot armor and tells us that the next hour will be absolutely relentless. Shortly after this brutal opening sequence, the narrative introduces a massive walking wildcard, Soldier Boy. But here is the brilliant, agonizing twist. He makes a very brief, fleeting appearance before completely vanishing from the board. He basically leaves this incredibly heavy, unresolved tension hanging over the rest of the episode like a suffocating dark cloud. As a viewer, you're just constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, and the story brilliantly uses that paranoia against you to build a profound sense of dread. So we really have to look at the larger thematic puzzle here. Why completely sideline the man who literally biologically created Homelander? Well, from a storytelling perspective, this is a masterstroke. He might be preserved for a final post-credits punch, or maybe left ambiguous to seed a future spin-off. But more importantly, in the immediate present, his deliberate absence sets the perfect isolated stage. Homelander's ultimate crutch, his father, is denied to him. Homelander needs to feel completely, utterly abandoned by the one person he actually craved validation from, just so his impending psychological break hits with maximum devastating impact. Which brings us to Act 2, and this leads directly into a genuinely brain-breaking narrative twist that alters the entire DNA of the series. Huey, the character who has served as the show's absolute moral anchor since episode 1, injects himself with Compound V. He officially crosses the line and becomes a soup. Just let that sit for a second. I want us to really process the profound tragedy of what that means for his character arc and how it reframes the entire thematic core of the story. For 5 grueling years, Huey was the normal guy trapped in a room full of unstable gods. He was the one who couldn't throw a bus or shoot lasers out of his eyes, but he was always there to constantly remind us that human fragility and morality actually matter. Willingly taking Compound V is the complete, devastating inversion of everything he represented. This brilliantly mirrors Butcher's own dark descent into madness, yet the crucial, heartbreaking difference here is that Huey miraculously keeps his humanity and his empathy intact. As we push further into this breakdown, I'll explain exactly why he desperately needs this specific, tainted power upgrade to face the harrowing, impossible choice waiting for him at the climax. Midway through the runtime, we hit Act 3, and we finally reach the absolute boiling point. It's the moment we've dreaded since the pilot. Homelander completely, irreversibly loses his grip on reality. He begins slaughtering innocent people in broad daylight, and he doesn't do it as a calculated strategic political play. He isn't doing this to send a message to the media or to intimidate his rivals. He does it simply because the leash is gone, and he finally can. The sheer casualness of the brutality is what makes the sequence so cinematic and uniquely terrifying. The illusion has just completely cracked. For years, Homelander has been exhausted, merely performing sanity. He's been desperately trying to fill that gaping, unhealable void in his chest with the obsessive need to be worshipped as a literal, benevolent god. Now, that paranoia takes over his mind entirely. He starts personally and brutally eliminating anyone, civilians, politicians, former allies, who doesn't immediately bow down to his presence. When an entity with the sheer, unmatched destructive capability of Homelander stops holding back, the very concept of limits is permanently erased from the world. This horrifying, indiscriminate massacre acts as the final, irreversible catalyst for the entire narrative. It pushes a fully enhanced, desperate, and dying Billy Butcher to stop playing chess and intentionally lure Homelander into a final, legendary winner-takes-all confrontation. After years of skirmishes, mind games, and near misses, the immovable god is finally truly going to meet the unstoppable monster. And the stage they choose for this bloody reckoning is nothing short of brilliant. I need you to picture the brilliant, intentional setting for this apocalyptic clash. Butcher lures him directly to the White House. Staging this epic, bloody showdown on the manicured front lawn of the White House isn't just an excuse for a visually cool, big-budget action set piece. It is heavy, deliberate, masterful symbolism. It perfectly illustrates how the very nation that manufactured, marketed, and blindly worshipped this corporate monster must now stand by and face the devastating, bloody consequences of its own creation, right on its own front lawn. The chickens have finally, violently come home to roost. The choreography of this sequence is intensely deliberate. Look at how it unfolds. Despite all his lethal enhancements, Butcher is initially brutally overpowered by Homelander. Homelander is simply in a completely different biological category, tearing through defenses with ease. But then comes the massively emotional turning point. Ryan steps in. He makes the agonizing choice to fight alongside Butcher, consciously choosing his flawed surrogate human father over his flawless biological creator. And just when the scale tips ever so slightly, an enraged Kimiko joins the fray, completely changing the mathematical odds and the spatial dynamics of this entire desperate fight. In the absolute blinding chaos of this battle, we reach Act 4, which is a critical cinematic turning point. Kimiko manages to hit Homelander with a catastrophic point-blank blast or explosive element that fundamentally alters his biology. It partially removes the V from his bloodstream. Now, it doesn't completely strip his powers. He isn't totally helpless by any means, but it makes him undeniably less than what he was. For the very first time in his existence, it forcefully strips away his aura of absolute, terrifying invincibility, leaving a permanent physical and psychological scar. I really want to emphasize how brilliant this specific writing choice is. This partial depowering is psychologically far more devastating to him than any physical beating could ever be. You see, Homelander came out of a sterile lab as something inherently inhuman. He has never once, in his entire pampered existence, experienced the actual grounded feeling of being weak. For the first time in his life, he looks down at his own hands and realizes he is mortal. He's vulnerable. And the terrifying realization washes over his face that he's actually capable of being destroyed. Cornered, bleeding for the first time, and completely desperate, Homelander's facade shatters completely. He lashes out like a wounded, cornered animal and savagely attacks Kimiko. But he is entirely unaware of the dark, unseen biological weapon currently in play. Kimiko, driven by her own deep personal traumas and massive losses, has secretly, willingly infected herself with the lethal, soup-killing virus. She's a living Trojan horse. By attacking her in a fit of blind rage, Homelander unwittingly seals his own inevitable fate. When Homelander finally contracts the virus, the resulting cinematic sequence is chilling to the bone. He dies, but not in some heroic blaze of glory, and not in a massive, spectacular explosion of CGI lasers. His mind just breaks. He starts heavily hallucinating. He breaks down into tears. He literally begs for his life. Think about that. The single most powerful, intimidating being on the face of the planet dies terrified, weak, and utterly alone. He's finally forced to experience the exact same paralyzing, sickening fear he spent his entire life casually inflicting on the rest of the world. It is poetic, miserable, and absolute justice. But as the camera lingers, we move into Act 5 and realize the true nightmare doesn't end with Homelander's last breath. Butcher, having finally achieved the bloody goal he chased for years, looks around and makes a chilling decision. He won't stop. He decides in a moment of utter clarity and madness to deploy this airborne virus on every single soup on the planet, without any exception, regardless of whether they're innocent or guilty. In this horrifying pivot, Butcher fully tragically transforms into the exact same mass-murdering, authoritarian monster he spent 5 seasons desperately fighting to destroy. This incredibly dark turn forces a horrifying narrative question upon us. Who can possibly stop a man who has nothing left to lose, and who is fully willing to commit global genocide to impose his worldview? Someone has to stop Butcher. And tragically, yet beautifully, that immense, soul-crushing burden falls on the newly powered Huey. Huey must step up and prepare to deliver the final lethal blow to his surrogate older brother and mentor. This right here is exactly why the narrative needed him to take that Compound V earlier. It was all leading to this. In a deeply poetic, visually heartbreaking resolution, Huey steps forward and saves the world from Butcher. And the most vital, nuanced detail in the framing of this scene is that when Huey strikes the fatal blow, Butcher doesn't fight back in anger. He dies with a look of profound relief washing over his face. You realize Butcher never actually wanted to survive this war. He hated himself way too much. He just desperately needed someone worthy, someone whose inherent humanity remained pure and intact, to finally put him down like a rabid dog. And Huey, through all his immense suffering, had earned that tragic right. After the profound, choking dust finally settles on this harrowing climax, the cinematography shifts, bringing us to Act 6. We are brought to a deliberate time skip. This chilling, quiet epilogue shows us the lingering aftermath, the actual shape of the world once the gods, the monsters, and the crusaders have finally finished slaughtering each other. Let's look closely at the timeline of this new reality and what it ultimately says about the nature of power. Months after the massacre, Huey and Annie marry, trying to find some semblance of solace in each other. As the years bleed on, we see them painstakingly building a quiet, anonymous life, successfully raising Ryan together in peace, actively working to break that generational cycle of violence. But the camera doesn't end on their happy faces. The most chilling, brutally realistic detail comes a full decade down the line. The inevitable, completely effortless return of Stan Edgar. We see him calmly walking right back into his corporate throne, reclaiming his absolute power over the industry as if literally nothing ever happened. And that final image right there perfectly, flawlessly encapsulates the cynical, brilliant thesis of this entire narrative. Think about it. The individual heroes are left forever physically and psychologically traumatized. The literal monsters are dead and buried in the dirt. But the corrupt, overarching machinery of the world, the faceless corporations, the men in immaculate suits, the military-industrial complex, the system simply waits it out, dusts itself off, puts on a fresh red tie, and gets right back to work. Nothing fundamental about the power structure actually changes. As we look back at the ashes of this universe, I leave you to deeply ponder this outcome. In a narrative world that prides itself on actions having real, devastating, and permanent consequences, is this uncompromising, bleak conclusion exactly the ending this story always deserved? Will this classical tragedy satisfy your need for cinematic closure, or is it simply too dark, too realistic a reflection of our own immovable corporate reality? I'm gonna let you sit with that and be the absolute judge.